Hello, I'm Roger Watson. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Nurse Education Practice. And in this 10-minute session, I'm going to talk about writing the methods section of an academic manuscript. Now, just to recap, as usual, we've already covered writing the title and the abstract, the introduction, and then the background to an academic manuscript. The important thing about the methods section is, as I've already pointed out in the section about writing the background, is that it should follow logically from your background section. The methods section covers the design and the methods, which are slightly different, and even the methodology, which again is slightly different, but I'll come back to that. So in your background you will have stated a clear research question. You may well have aims and hypotheses and so forth. However, the research question is the key aspect at the end of your background. It's very narrow, and the methods will remain narrow and focused on what you're doing. But the methods section, of course, should be based on that research question. The research question will dictate the design, and the design will dictate the methods. So it's all part of a logical process. An important aspect to the methods section is that it should stand alone. In fact, to some extent, all the sections of the academic manuscript, while they are interlinked, should to some extent stand alone. However, the methods should stand alone. Its only real link should be back to the research question, but having read the background, it should be clear what you're going to do here. Now, just as an aside, some journals prefer the research question to be in the methods section, but if they ask you for that, then you have to do it, but usually the research question will have been left to the background. But here, this might be the place to develop hypotheses as well, because you may well be testing hypotheses if it's an experimental study. Remember, if it's a survey study or a qualitative study, you won't be concerned with hypotheses. But that's, again, just an aside. So my best advice for a methods section is to begin by stating what the design is. You could state that the design is a randomized controlled trial, double-blind randomized controlled trial, or a longitudinal survey, or a qualitative study using grounded theory. You could very clearly state the design. That should be right at the front. You may want to discuss methodology, but I would be very careful about this, because sometimes it gets rather too long and often irrelevant. It's more common in qualitative papers, and sometimes if the method is very unusual in a quantitative paper, to discuss the methodology to some extent. The methodology is really around the methods, why you're using it, what's the theoretical justification, and so forth. And that is separate from the actual methods, which actually say exactly what you're going to do. So it may be necessary to discuss something about the methodology, but I would make sure that you do it briefly. So your design will be the first section of your methods section. State the design, perhaps some discussion about the methodology, but if it's a very common methodology like a randomized controlled trial, you don't need to discuss this, because everybody knows what they're about and what the parameters are, and there's plenty of external references to those. Then it's neither new and it's not difficult for people to grasp the concept. Then you want to describe your methods, and I don't want to go through this in too much detail. We don't really have time or space to do that. But what I would say about your methods is, when you're writing your methods, be aware that the journal should have appointed experts to read your paper as reviewers. The editors won't necessarily be experts. They may be roughly in that area clinically or methodologically, but they won't be experts. They will be requiring experts, and those experts may well be clinical, if it's a clinical topic, and they will almost certainly be methodological, and if it's a quantitative study, as well as experts in the actual methodology, for example, randomized controlled trial, they may well appoint another reviewer who is a statistician who will deal specifically with the data and the analysis. So you will have at least 2, perhaps 3 reviewers. There will always be 2 for any journal that, for example, has an impact factor, but there may be 3. Very occasionally there may be more. The important thing from your point of view is to make sure that you realise, or at least even if they're not, treat them as if they're experts. When I used to handle reviews for articles as an editor, the most common comment that came from reviewers was quite simply this. They would say, "I do not understand what the author or authors have done here." Some people don't write their methods very clearly, and sometimes that's deliberate because they don't really perhaps understand the methods too well. So you have to write very clearly, and if in doubt, make sure that you say something. Don't leave any gaps at all. It's always easier after a paper's been reviewed to remove material, which you will be given the opportunity to do that if they like the paper. If someone sees gaps in your methodology, they may assume that you don't understand what you're doing, and they may well recommend that the paper is rejected. So if in doubt, make sure that you explain anything and everything very, very clearly. So just to recap again, the methods section will begin with the design, a clear statement of the design, and a slightly longer section expounding on the methods, how you're going to get your data, what you're going to use to gather the data, and so forth. And then after that, you should then state, but again, clearly, clarity is the word I'll use all the way through here, clearly what the analysis is going to be. Now, if the analysis is very standard, for example, let's take a randomized control trial where you'll have descriptive data of the numbers of people involved and their demographic details, then you'll have some sort of inferential analysis of the difference between the 2 groups. If it's a survey research or a methodological study, you may well have some multivariate analysis as well. But the thing to do is to state that clearly and do it in that order. I would always say that you're going to do descriptive data first, and then the nature of the inferential statistics, and if necessary, the nature of any multivariate analysis in that order. You don't have to go into too much detail, you just have to make sure that you tell the reviewers, and particularly the statistician, which methods you used. Also name the statistical packages that you're going to use so that they understand that too, and within those statistical packages which what the detailed analytical techniques are going to be. Again, this doesn't have to be in too much detail, it just has to be enough so that anyone reading it will know, okay, they're doing a t-test or they're doing a factor analysis or so forth, or what kind of factor analysis and which package that you're using. So again, to recap, the methods should start with the design, possibly a description of methodology, then fairly detailed methods, and then the analysis, which is really part of the methods. And then the methodology section should always end with a statement on ethics and possibly access to your participants. From whom did you get ethical permission to do the study? Were there any ethical issues that had to be dealt with, and how did you access the study study participants? Were they randomly obtained, or were they sequentially or systematically obtained? These things have to be clear so that the reviewers know the extent to which the data can be generalized. So that's the methods section. It should be self-contained, it should have its own internal structure, and I would reckon that a good guide for a methods section is that it shouldn't be more than about 500 words long. Now, again, that's not a rule, that's not a prescription, but if you aim to write something that's about 500 words long, then you won't go wrong. You may have to make it slightly longer if the methods are complex, but I would aim not to make it too long. And another important and final point, before I forget to say it, is do not mention any results in your methods section. Leave the results out. Don't say we did a t-test and we found. Just describe what you did. Leave the methods separate from the results. Leave the results for the next section. So that's all I want to say about writing the methods section for a paper. Keep it discreet, keep it short, and explain everything as well as you can and as clearly as you can. So I hope you found that useful, and once again, as ever, thank you very much for listening.